So good afternoon. Oh, come on, we can do better than that. I know it's been a very long day. Good afternoon. How's everybody enjoying the conference?
Yes.
Yeah? No, oh, one yeah? Very good. Come on, one more. Yeah, good. Okay, I want to get you guys excited. We're going to be talking about game development. How can you be bored if we're going to be talking about game development? There we go. Okay. So, I love playful experiences. I love playing games. I really am happy to be here in Russia and working at Annapolis University because my hobby is now my job. I work on the design of games, both analog and digital, video, all day, and that is my job. But my history here comes out of basically an academic tradition inside of AI. And I come out of the automotive industry and developing systems for that. So my hobby was always games. I really love playing games, board games, tabletop games, computer games, doesn't matter. I like playing games because they have such interesting storylines, because they allow you to be creative, because there's things that you get out of them that you can win through it. You can have achievement through games. You can also learn things through games. In fact, there's a lot of games that we play every single day, right? If you look at flight simulators, pilots, they play games in order to become better pilots. They play flight simulators. The only difference between the one that's on your PC and the one that's inside of their system is just the scale. So I really love this. And my work has really revolved around kind of moving into the hobby. So I have publications in such diverse areas as the mathematical modeling of zombies. And in this case, it was looking at how do we look at really interesting ideas inside of creating government policy to deal with epidemics. So there's actually a real world use for this sort of thing. As much as I hate the term real world, because everything we do is part of the real world. Understanding Minecraft, computational intelligence and AI in games, now the transactions on AI in games. So I've been working a lot on making my hobby my work and research in games. I do a lot of experimental setups, I do a lot of player testing, I do a lot of design testing. And what I'm going to show you tonight has to do a lot with design. And how can you make really nice playable experiences? And all of this comes out of this idea of some assembly is usually required when you play a game or when you get any sort of object these days. So there's this idea when you buy, say, go into IKEA and get a flat pack of furniture. How does that work? What happens? You bring back that flat pack of furniture to your apartment, to your domicile, and really you think this should be easy, right? I'm a grown man and I can take this flat pack of furniture and make this bookshelf. It will happen by the end of the day. And the process kind of goes in your head something like this. Well, you start by just kind of putting things together, right? You just kind of glue things together, you get out the hammer, that looks like it goes there, plug it together, right? Because you're a smart human being who can come up with this. And at some point, you might look at the manual just for that tricky part, right? You might pull it out and check through and make sure what you did was maybe correct. But what happens at the end? You end up with something that resembles something like the picture. You know, you start out with a bookshelf and all of a sudden you have a desk or an armoire. But what's up with these 3 extra screws? If only you knew where they went. And that might come back to haunt you one day when you move that bookshelf and the whole thing comes tumbling down. And really what it amounts to is people don't read manuals. RTFM, right? Like how many times do we say this? Pretty much everybody that works within an IT group or is now kind of like an IT head guy, at some point you work tech support. Right? Problem exists between keyboard and chair. right? You put that in the report. They didn't read the manual. And we keep asking people, just read the manual. Stop coming back to me. Stop asking me how to do it. Stop it. Because you're wasting my time. But humans don't read manuals. We're bad at it. We hate manuals. We hate them so much. This square here, how many of you are familiar with Monopoly? Yay, wonderful. What does this square do? Shout it out. What happens if you land on free parking in Monopoly? Anyone know? Nothing. I hear nothing. Yay. Anyone else? Nothing. Good, okay. Some of you have read the rules to Monopoly. Congratulations. And since you're part of the logical set of humanity, probably that is what you did, is you did that. So if you look at what happens in the rules, nothing happens. But there's lots of homebrew versions of this where people say, well, if you land on the tax thing, you put your taxes in the middle. Or if it goes to the bank, it goes here. And a lot of people make it like this lottery square where some amount of money collects in the middle of the board, and then if you land on free parking, you win the pot. 68% of respondents in a study by Hasbro said that they had never read the rules to Monopoly. That they had played it without knowing the rules. 30% of players admitted that they made up rules while playing the game. And there's this big work right now inside of the academic games community about how terrible Monopoly is as a board game. Because there's so many reports of people having games that last days and days and days. And it's mostly because they don't use a lot of the rules that are inside of Monopoly that change it from a 5-hour game back into a 1-hour game. Such as, did you know if you're a bankrupted player, the player who bankrupted you gets all your stuff? That's the official rule of Monopoly. There's another rule in it that if you land on a square and you do not purchase it, it goes for auction amongst the players. These are all pieces that are put in order to speed up gameplay in Monopoly that are not utilized inside of it. And a lot of these house rules, we'll call them, have been officialized. Okay? So what I want to do is talk about cognitive models and why do people have problems understanding Monopoly and have these issues. So this is the cognitive model according to Norman. He works primarily with objects. And what I really want you to see here is you have the world, you have your brain, and then you have this kind of feedback loop, which I'll explain more in detail. So we have this kind of loop, we have the world, we perceive what happens, through those perceptions we make judgments, we come up with goals that we want to have within our brain, and then we make some intentions to act, we make some actions, and we come out with a response. So let's take a look at Mario World 1-1. So here, this is Mario World 1-1, how you would see it if you were just starting to play. If I right now got an old NES or got one of the NES classics and handed it to you and booted up Mario, that's the first screen that you see and that's the object that you see. Now imagine that you're an alien. You have no idea, right? You've just seen this glowing screen and this controller. Or this thing, we'll call it for the sake of convenience to your own human brains, a controller, but if you're an alien, it's a Google Flump. Okay? And if you show this sort of game, especially to some elderly parents, what do they start to do? They press buttons, right? They press buttons, they press the buttons, and then they go, the little man is not doing what I want the little man to do. Right? A child picking this up goes, the little man is not doing what I want the little man to do. How does this kind of move through from a cognitive idea inside of our brains? Well, maybe that's me over there, right? I'm not really doing much, but this thing has some buttons on it Right? So I'm having this interpretation of the state. Okay, what is happening in the world? What do I have to interact with the world? And then I start to evaluate the state. Well, not moving isn't good. I kind of want to move, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's going to kill me and nothing in my way. And this thing must move me somehow. This is the only thing I have that has something that looks like it's an input. So let's play around with this. My goal is to move forward and understand this. So now I begin to have an intention to act. What am I going to do? So my intent could be, well, this thing goes up, down, left, right, or I can press some buttons. And now I try to come up with something inside of my intents to act to create then a sequence of actions that will reach my goal. In this case, press right, maybe that will go right. And then we have the final action in the world. Okay, so that looks pretty simple, right? Yeah. In fact, your brain is doing this all the time, every day, for every object that you interact with. You have a mental picture in your brain as to how that object works in the world. And you are recreating these all the time. We call this process learning. It is this massive feedback loop and trying to figure out what actions will lead to the goals that I want to lead to based upon feedback from the observed state of the environment. That is learning. So this is the cognitive model that we're assuming is inside of everybody's head. Okay. Rob Davenau. Anybody familiar with that name? Risk Legacy, a lot of the legacy games. So he's a big-time games designer. Wonderful guy. He had an experience at MIT. And he said that a few years back at MIT, he went in front of this big smart room with all these really intelligent people. These guys were making nuclear toasters. And he wanted to see if he could test them when it came to the idea of games. So he asked people to pair up. He said, choose a game that looks fun. And in 5 minutes, tell me what the rules are. Learn the rules, and then you're going to tell me at the end. Oh, by the way, I removed all the rule books. Okay. So that means only through the game objects are people able to come up with the rules of this game. Okay. This looks like a rather simple idea, right? If we want to see what you can get from the object, don't give people a rule book, right? Give them the flat pack furniture without the instruction manual. So his findings were that, wow, it was amazing what people were able to gain just from looking at the objects in terms of what the real rules were. And he has a wonderful little chapter inside of a book about this, talking about this experiment. But the only issue here is there's no evidence. It's just anecdotal. Hey, I gave some people from MIT this thing, and it worked. This is a way to play test. Now, that probably works really well for Rob Davenau, who is a multi-millionaire games designer going around and building Risk Legacy and etc. But for me as a scientist, or a computer scientist, and we'll worry about the distinction later, I'm interested in, is this repeatable? What was the sample size? How many people made these statements? What statements exactly did they make? What objects are more likely to be able to be figured out via this process? And understanding this. And this is where our contribution starts inside of my lab in Annapolis. There's a few things that I'm really interested in digging into with this process, and the first one has to do with the idea of age and play. So there is this common misconception that games are objects for children. And this doesn't really match with the historical use of games as simulations for war. We look at Kriegspiel, we look at chess. These were all war games, or games about war. Warhammer 40K, that is basically a modern day version of Kriegspiel. of what Prussian soldiers were being trained on in order to make tactical decisions. And there's beautiful documentation over the war games that were done in order to prevent shipping losses during World War II, primarily by women working on that. So these distinctions are becoming far more important when it comes to an aging player demographic. In fact, the game that I just showed you there, if you were 15 when the game came out, you are now 47. So the people who grew up with a Nintendo are now in their late 40s, early 50s. That is the changing demographics of games right now. Mine would probably be more around Super Mario 64 in terms of that. Okay, some other interesting demographics. This is out of the US. There's the Electronic Entertainment Institute, and I'm using their figures, but I think this correlates well with a lot of what I'm seeing around the world. And that is 59% of respondents back in 2014 played games. Average player age was 31. Does that shock you? No? I see some shaking heads from the more youthful people in the room. Okay, good. Only 29% of the player demographic was under 18. 29%, less than a third. What does that say for violence in video games? What does that say for the narratives and stories that we can make? What does that say for mature themes in adult situations? I think it says a lot about we're not looking at the right audience. Gamers of over 50 years in age also increased 32% year over year. Looking at some newer statistics from 2017. The number of people playing games is increasing. Makes sense. Gamers age 18 or older, 72% of the gaming population. Average player age, 35 years old. Okay? These reports are freely available online under the ESA. You can look these up. 67% of parents play video games with their children at least once a week now. And adult women represent a greater proportion of the video game playing population than boys under the age of 18. So, girl gamers exist. Demonstratively. They demonstratively exist. The debate is over. Okay? Forget about Gamergate, forget about all of that. I'm sorry, games are played by women. They are. Surprise. Okay? And in fact, you are better making a game that brings in women than 18-year-old boys. It's a bigger part of the market. And guess what? They got the money too. They're the people buying it. They have the disposable income to put in this direction. Okay? So, this is a real shock to a lot of developers. So we looked at participants, in this case, looking at age of 3 different groups, consisting of an average age of 14, 22, and 40 years. And this is mostly what you do in every single university in the world, and that is you test the people who are nearby. So you grab a whole bunch of university students. We had the local school work with us on this, and we also had the staff and professors act in this study to understand what happens in terms of decoding the rules without a rule book depending upon age. So these are the 2 games selected for the study. We have Hive Pocket, which is kind of a chess-ish variant, Kind of basically you have to surround the enemy's queen bee with your own stones, and there's movement rules depending on which creature you have. And another really interesting card game called Hanabi. And Hanabi has this really interesting property that you don't look at your own cards. In fact, you're the only person at the table who is not allowed to look at your own cards. And the idea of the game is you're passing information. It's a cooperative, basically, poker or trick-taking game, where you're trying to make sequences by passing information to other people at the table, and if you collectively put the fireworks in sequence, then you win. But if you make a mistake in your plays, then you begin to take down the timer, and it could all explode. Okay? Hanabi coming from the Japanese for fireworks. So, high pocket again, strategic game for 2 players. First, please put down object, surround the queen. And Hanabi, in terms of this, you're placing the cards in order from 1 to 5. Cooperative game, and don't show yourself your own cards. Make everybody else look at them and then pass information. Okay. So, we were able to then run some statistics over this. Yay, statistics. Basically ends up with big tables like this. Yay. No? Not fans of big tables? Do I have charts? Maybe I'll have some graphs later, I don't know. Okay, the big way that I can basically say this is that there are some differences here in terms of the cognitive selections that happen based upon age, of how people see games. So this is basically just the statistical proof of this, and if you're interested, the paper is available online, so I will just skip through those and give you this, the summary results slide. So what it showed was that this kind of professor set was able to drive a lot of logic out of what was going on inside of the game. Was able to kind of really delve in deep, and they had a methodical way of looking through this. Whereas the young were basically able to put some stuff and observe some intuitives and some game objects and glue that the white stones went with the white stones and the black stones went with the black stones, but then it wasn't really this kind of, okay, if this, then that process. University students were much better at kind of coming up with this general theme of the game, whereas the school students, our youngest set, basically said, oh, this is a game that I already know. So this leads to huge problems when you have, for example, Hanabi, where you're pointing the cards away from someone. Because there's nothing on the card that says, please point me away. And pretty much every game that you have ever played, keep your cards hidden. Prevent someone from seeing them. So these types of anti-patterns, it allows us to kind of see them. What were the problems in the game design that were less detectable, that we would need to really highlight if we have a rule book or a shorter rule sheet? Because it was easy to see that, well, I had to put the numbers from 1 to 5 in order, and I had to keep the colors together, but then point cards away from face was never really declared. Now, could I make this better? Maybe I put on the card, this way towards you. Write it on the card. As a reminder, put something inside of there that prevents people from making the mistake or signifies that you shouldn't do that. So let's go back into that idea of women with gaming, what I talked about earlier, because I find this a very important thing to kind of press. So again, remember that adult women right now represent a larger proportion of the game buying market than boys under 18, which is a massive change in how we need to think about design and designing for that. And really, I would say that, and I think there's some good evidence for this, that issues with the marketing and publication of games are the reason why there's not an equal split of developers in this room between male and female. Because we all had these toys growing up that were geared towards men that were highly technological. And so we engaged with that, and we wanted to know how to build that, and we wanted to go in and design that. And this has really hampered STEM recruitment with women, because they don't engage in digital games at an early age like boys do. Okay? I think you can really see this even inside of things like Lego, and the idea of the kind of pinkification of Lego just recently. So here, this is a 1971 advertisement for Lego. Dutch company, basically the name translates literally to good play, Lego. And here, what do we see? We see a little boy and a little girl, and they've built some Lego together. Great. Right? Parody. 81. We see yet another little girl who's building some Lego. Okay? What do we see recently with the Friends line? Is this idea of targeting only women with the marketing. And this kind of, let's put it in pink, and let's make the people different, and let's make them less complicated. Now you may say that this is crass, that this was a design by Lego in order to somehow, subvert the market. But what was their market position before this? So they did 4 years of study on 3,000 children and looked at Lego because at its current form, it was not attracting women. The design was just not at all attracting women. Only 9% of their market share was from women. That share has jumped to 28% since the release of the Friends line. And part of this comes from what did they do in terms of their play testing. They went back into girls and they said, why do you play with Lego? And they said, well, it's stupid. I build the dollhouse and then my brother comes in and kicks it and breaks it. Or, I don't want to rebuild the thing. I want to have more, or the little men are not fun to play with. So a lot of it had to do with women wanted to play with the final built object, whereas guys wanted to tear it apart, rebuild it, tear it apart, rebuild it, tear it apart, rebuild it. And when I talked to my wife about this, I was saying, could you believe that they found this? She's like, now I understand why you enjoy Lego. Because she basically went, I have no, why are you always rebuilding the thing? Just make the thing and then it's done. Okay? And part of this was also, they wanted this real figure, this idea of this kind of connection in terms of the figure and the girl playing with it in terms of this. And there was a lot of intertextuality and multimedia thrown against this. And what I mean by that is there was not just the Lego toy, there was also the Friends television series, and there was the Lego Friends movie, and the Lego Friends the t-shirt, Lego Friends the video game, Lego Friends the flamethrower, the whole bit of marketing around that, and merchandising. But Lego is still not kind of continuing this. This kind of trend of gentrification is kind of getting worse these days. In 2018, they started releasing sets which they labeled for men. Yay! That will be fun. And in fact, it was then taken down later due to the amount of complaints that these sets, with this kind of gentrification. I think it's one of these things of, there's gentrification like, okay, I make the Friends line and there's people who will buy this set for a little girl, and maybe that then bridges them into a different set. But when you're labeling something is only for something, right, you're being very exclusionary inside of it. So the marketing, I don't think, was there. There's good gentrification and there's bad gentrification. This is definitely exclusive. No girls allowed in the clubhouse level of design. Okay, are we familiar with this? Guess who? Okay, there actually is a Russian version of this. I was able to find it recently. I was able to find a picture. So the idea of Guess Who is basically you have a person who you are. So in this case, the person, whoever it is in the front, is Maria with the hat, and I know, it's Maria. So it's basically like a guessing game of, does your person have red hair? And if they say yes, then you knock down everybody that doesn't have red hair, and if they say no, then you knock down all the people with red hair. Does the person have glasses? Does the person have a big nose? Is the person a woman? And so all of these questions are to narrow down the set of your opponent. So let's just see what happens when you give this to a 6-year-old girl in its original form. It's not only boys who are important, girls are important too. If grown-ups get into thinking that girls are not as important, they won't give these little girls as much care. And also if girls want to be a girl, and guess who? They will always lose against a boy, and it'll be harder for them to win, and I'm cross about that. If you don't fix it soon, my mom could throw guess who out. And this is a 6-year-old girl's letter to Milton Bradley, the publishers of Guess Who, about their game. And this was published back in 2012 inside of the Huffington Post. Why is this? Guess how many girls are in the Guess Who game? One? No, more than one, because I can show you Maria right there, and there's one in the back. Okay? 4, 5. There are 6 girls in the original set, in terms of this.
And what's the size of the set?
Let's see here, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 by 3. So in the 20s, right? So maybe a quarter of the set. Okay. What's happening here is this little 6-year-old girl is going to play Guess Who against her brother. And being a little 6-year-old girl, what character does she pick? Another girl. And her brother is smart. Maybe a bit too smart. And so their game pretty much runs like this. Hi sis, let's play Guess Who. Okay. Pick your person, flip everybody up. Okay, I'll go first. Is your person a girl? Yes. Your turn. And so then 6 people are left. Guess Who is, by its very nature, a game that works off of a discriminant from the mathematical sense. You're basically saying who is in the set and who is out of the set. But this discriminant, in this case, is extremely discriminatory. Right? So each of these allows for a certain set of eliminations. So we wanted to kind of look at this kind of issue of gender in games. And in fact, Guess Who responded to this, and they have changed the game since then. There are now more women characters within the set in Guess Who, so they took that in. And we wanted to look at this. This is coming out of a project done primarily by my PhD student, and they examined the game of Goblin Dice. So we had 80 users, 50 identifying as male, 30 as female. Again, just as we did before, did the analysis. And the majority of the rules were stated equally well by both male and female participants. However, 2 factors have been found to be different. Males stated that the goblins were running away from the boulder, whereas females were more likely to say that they were playing a soccer game and cooperating. So even in a game where there's no really obvious gender mechanic, there still is some form of cognitive differences there that we can see. So just remember, gender is changing, players are getting older, and we need to respond to this. If we don't respond to these two issues, we will lose 3/4 of the market. Because 18-year-old boys are no longer your target. And we need to playtest far more rigorously. We need to look into these sorts of things. We need to look into these sorts of playtests and focus on them. So enabling of this is looking at to develop methods, and we can find this. I hope that today I was able to show you one of these methods for that. And removing the rulebook allows us to see where these types of problems are within our design. Okay, if you want to find out more about my research, I post pretty much every single paper that I publish. They are freely available online. There's contact information there as well in terms of if you have questions about what you're reading and have that sort of design. And some of this is coming out of Hamna Aslam's work for her PhD. Okay. We also have an upcoming book looking at this design issue, hopefully coming out in June, published by Morgan and Claypool. And that is my contact information, if there's any further questions to this. So I'd like to thank you all so much for your kind invitation to come here and see Lenin's birthplace. It's really interesting to say that I got to come and see this. And I really hope that you have a great time for the rest of today and tomorrow at the conference. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I'm very fascinated with advancement of computer-generated content in the games. I was fascinated with fractal things and the things like landscape generation in Minecraft. They are very interesting. And advancement in the neural network fields likely to give us even more interesting way to generate content without human. So how do you think it would affect the game development, game design? Would the game design will be assisted by some kind of technology based on neural network?
Okay. So the area that you're talking about is known as procedural content generation.
Yes.
Yes, and this is an area that I'm also very deep into. And there is a lot of wonderful work being put against this. The biggest issue right now has to do with creating something that is as good as a human-driven development. You know, a lot of it has to do with ensuring that the level meets with a narrative requirement, or meets with a story requirement, or meets with, doesn't break halfway through the level. So there's all these sorts of considerations. I would say if you're interested in kind of looking a bit deeper into this, there's a great taxonomy paper by Julian Tegelius's lab that came out in 2011, which I can probably get you the link if you want to message me there. And it kind of breaks down some of these issues. In terms of where are we going with this, you see a lot of requirements now for a lot more content, especially with like these kind of app-based games like Candy Crush and Sugar Saga and Crazy Cupcakes. It's one of these things where you have to constantly be generating a new set of levels because people play through them so quickly. And that area, I think, is an underrated place that you can use a lot of this. King in Sweden is right now nuts about this.
Thank you.
Thank you for presentation. I have a question. How do you have statistics for other sex people with not men and not women, and statistics for other nationalities?
So transgendered and other gendered peoples.
Yes, not only and for other nationalities.
Okay, so the statistics that I gave there are primarily out of the US. in terms of those demographic breakdowns. The biggest issue, and I would love, because reviewers keep on saying, why do you never talk about transgender? And really, here's the biggest problem. One, I'm in Russia, and I don't want to get into the politics, please, because I like my work visa. And the other problem with this is, usually in order to do statistics, you need a big, giant representative sample. You need to get 30, 40, 50, 100 people to be part of your study. And this is mostly one-on-one user testing with an actual user in my lab. The current statistics on transgenderism, I think, is less than 1% of 1% of the population. So I need like 1,000 people, and then I can pick up that one, and then they have to agree to come to my lab, and then they have to agree to do the test, and then they have to agree that I'm going to publish this. So there's huge issues with properly getting that sort of sample. So I don't want to neglect that group, but I can't get a sample together in order to give any statistics.
Okay, what about other nationalities?
So other nationalities in terms of these tests, again, I've been primarily doing it in Russia because we have wonderful ethics paperwork here, which is none. But I do have other researchers that are working in Denmark, and they're going to actually try to recreate this test there as well. So there is a lot of engagement now in these sorts of tests. So maybe in the next 2-3 years, we'll start to see some further publications or replications.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Professor Brown,
yes.
Many thanks for your presentation. It's always interesting to develop games and to make researches in such fields. And I have the following question. Do you have some researches which show which games are popular in specific age or gender groups?
No.
Okay.
I think there's one at the back there. I think it's an important thing that we should start to do that, though. That's great.
Hi, thank you very much for your speech. It was very useful for me because for now I'm having gamification course and it's very useful, really. Thank you very much. And I have a question. I know that in mobile sphere, they know that women are a huge part of paying audience. But on the computer sphere, only a few % of games are for women, like Sims, and there are no.
I wouldn't even argue that Sims is a gendered game in a way, but I had Sims. I don't know. I had Sims. That's fun.
Yes, I agree with it. But can the computer sphere change? Will computer sphere change like my biosphere? Because it's important that...
I think it's one of those things of these types of demographics tell companies that, yes, this is a market you can go after. I mean, you know, you're trying to convince basically you're trying to convince a set of companies that currently have more revenue than the films industry to change their minds about how they want to make a product. And what they've done is the same thing every year. Call of Duty, Call of Duty, Call of Duty, Call of Duty. Because people go out and buy the next one. So I think there's a lot of room here, especially in the independents and in the indie developers, to target that sort of space. Because it's not being targeted by the big mainstream publishers. So there's a lot of room there for more voices inside of the narrative of computer games. So that's wonderful that you're doing a gamification class and that you're encouraging people to kind of play this sort of thing.
Thank you. And why the mobile sphere is for women and computer is not?
I think part of it has to do with accessibility. You know, even when I run numbers, if I always poll my class and I say, how many of you play a video game on your phone? How many of you play a video game on your PC? How many, and I break it down. And if I did the demographics in North America, you will see huge spikes on Xboxes and PS3s and on PCs, and mobile goes down. When I do the same test in Russia, mobile goes through the roof because everybody has this in their pocket. Maybe not as colorful as this, but everybody has this in their pocket. Whereas, do you have the, $300, the 1,500 rubles to go and purchase an Xbox? And then the games at $60 a pop, right? If you're a college student, do you spend more on this that you're going to use every single day for 20 billion different things, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that's in your pocket? Or do you spend it on a single-purpose machine like an Xbox? And so I think it really has to do with accessibility to the technology at this point, as why you don't see it in that sphere. And gaming PCs are, again, it's a big expense. This is not. I can get a good phone that will play pretty much any single Android game for much cheaper than I can buy the latest gaming PC.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They ask us to stop, so спасибо большое за вопросы. И мы еще здесь с Джозефом, можете подойти к нам, и I think someone can just come here and yeah, so we're still here, just they, yeah. So thank you for your questions. Спасибо большое. Мы здесь.